Hey guys, Mr. Milton here. Today we're going to talk about factoring quadratics when a does not equal 1. At the end of this video, you should be able to factor a trinomial into two binomials when a is not 1. Okay. Recall from last lesson that we talked about factoring quadratics like this, x squared plus 10x plus 16. And we use this x to help us out. And in the top, we said, okay, a times c, in this case a is 1 and c is 16, so we wanted to find two numbers that multiply to give us 16, and on the bottom we wanted to add up to two numbers that gave us 10, and I just put this here so we have both numbers in our view as we're thinking about it. So you go through the tree. Remember that if you were confused at all or couldn't think of the number, sometimes it's just a mental block, that you can make a t-chart and you could say, okay, 1 times 16 is 16, I know that. 2 times 8. 4 times 4. And then, once you go through it, you'd have to go back to 8 so you don't repeat. You look at the signs. Okay, positive number, our signs are the same. Positive b, they're both positive. Okay, so 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. So, as we go through and look at our products, 17, 10, 8, we are looking for numbers that add to 10. That is 2 and 8. Okay. Now I'm going through the reasoning on how you can check through this. If you just looked at 16 and 10 and said 2 and 8, there's no need to do this. So don't. Okay. If you don't need to, don't. Okay. All right. So as we factor this into two binomials, we see that our first term is x squared. The only way to get to x squared is x times x. We already found the next two terms here. That was the point of that x method there. So 2 and 8. Okay, why are we allowed to just put x and x in the first term? It's the only way to multiply the two terms and get x squared. Sorry, that's what we just said. Okay, now, how about this one? We've got 4x squared plus 13x plus 10. Are we allowed to put x and x in as the first terms of this binomial? The answer is no, comma, because we need our first terms to multiply to get 4x squared and not just x squared. Okay? We'll finish this problem later in the notes. Okay, so when the a value is not 1, factoring becomes a little bit more difficult. So when a does not equal 1, follow this process. Always check for GCF. If there is one, take it out. We talked about that in lesson 3. And write what's left over, or we'll say factor, not write. And factor what's left over in the parentheses. If there's not one, you'll have to use, I'll say Xbox method. Xbox method. Okay, we've already talked about the x. We're going to add the box to it today. Okay, this is very easy to forget, but it's very important. Please do not forget to check for GCF. Make sure you always do that. We have to change our okay. We have to change our c value in the Xbox method. Okay, we'll do some practice problems on the back. And really, we aren't changing our c value because we've already kind of built it in to our Xbox method what the c value should be. Okay, but this time it'll be a little bit different than the c that's written on the page, possibly. So, number 1, we have 3x squared plus 12x minus 15. So this is not a problem that we really love because A is not 1. When A is 1 and we got down with our multiplication and addition facts, it got pretty quick. Okay, but in this case, A is not 1. First thing that we have to do is check and see, is there anything that goes into 3x squared, 12x, and 15? And we should notice, hey, they all have 3 as a factor. Let's factor that out. X squared plus 4x minus 5 left. Yes, we got to factor it all out. Now we have a quadratic still, but A is 1. And so we can factor that out pretty quick. We need to find two numbers that multiply to give us negative 5 and add to give us 4. Okay? And so this is negative, this is positive. That means they're different signs, and the bigger one is positive. 5 and negative 1. Okay. So as I write my final answer, I've got 3, the GCF. I can't forget to write that in my final answer. And then I have my two binomials, x plus 5, x minus 1. There we go. So not too bad. Okay, number 2. We have 2x squared plus 5x plus 2. So, as we look here, we're like, okay, A is not 1. Let's try to factor out a GCF. 2 goes into here, 2 goes into here, but it doesn't go into 5. So we can't factor a GCF, and this is where our X-box method comes in. Okay. So, our X-box method, the X we should be familiar with. Okay. So in our X, what we're trying to do, we will find two numbers that multiply to give us A times C. In this case, A is 2 and C is 2. And so our two numbers will multiply to give us 4. Okay, so this is the difference now that A is not 1. And add to give us 5. Everything else well, not everything else. Filling out this X is going to be the same. Two numbers that multiply to give us 4 and add to give us 5. 4 and 1. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. Okay, so this is the X part of our X box method. And now we have to add the box part. Now when we were factoring, when we were multiplying, we used the box and we went from the outside in. When we're factoring, we'll use the box and we'll go from the inside out. Okay? And so basically here, we know what's on the inside. In our first box, we're going to write A, 2x squared. In our last box, we're going to write C, which is 2. And then in our two middle boxes, we'll write the two terms that we came up with, 4 and 1. Now I want you to see this, that what we're doing with 4 and 1 is we're splitting this middle term. Okay, this middle term is 5x. So we won't just write 4 and 1, it's going to be 4x and 1x. Okay, so that variable will be attached in that box just like it was when we were done with our multiplication problems. Okay, so again, notice that now we're starting with the inside of our box completed and we don't have the outside of our box. Us factoring, we're going to go through each column and each row and we're going to take out the GCF. So I'm going to look at 2x squared and 4x. And I'm going to say, what's the greatest common factor between these two? Okay, I see that 2 goes into both 2 and 4. And I see that there's an x in both. So I took out the GCF of 2x from this row, or column. I'm going to do the same thing with the next column. I have 1x and 2. Okay, the important thing is that if there is no GCF, if there's no number that you say, oh, I can take out of both of them, remember that there's always a number, and that number is 1. 1 multiplies into 1x, 1 multiplies into 2. I'll do the same thing with the top row. 2x squared and 1x. Okay? And so I see that x is in both of them. And now I'll do that with the bottom row, where I have 4x and 2. And 2 goes into both of them. So what I have here, 2x plus 1, right here, and x plus 2. And those are my two binomials. Okay, and we can go through some more of those so that you can see that without the explanation of that, it might be a little bit shorter of a process. Okay, but the importance is not how fast we can get through the process, but how accurately we can do the process. So let's look at number 3. Number 3, we have 6x squared minus 23x plus 7. Okay, looking for a GCF, but 23 is prime, so we're not going to be able to find one. So now we have to make our box. Our C value is going to be 6 times 7, 42. Remember, that's because A times C. A is 6, C is 7. And our B value is going to be negative 23. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 42 and add to give me negative 23. I can see that I'm probably going to have some difficulty coming up with these numbers off the top of my head, so I'm going to make my chart. I got 1 times 42, 2 times 21, 3 times 14, 4 doesn't go, 5 doesn't go, 6 does, 6 and 7, and then I do 7 and 6, and so I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to use my reasoning to see where the signs go. So we multiply to get a positive. That means our signs have to be the same. And add to give us a negative. So that must mean that they're both negative. So, negative, 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 negative. As I go through and look at the possibilities, this is really the only one. Negative 2, negative 21 gives us negative 23. So, negative 2, negative 21. We completed our x. And now we'll go through our box. Okay, again we're starting from the inside out, so we have A has to go in the first box, 6x squared. We have C has to go in the last box, 7. And then our other two values, negative 2x, negative 21x goes here. I'll go through each row and each column and I'll take out the GCF. So the GCF between 6x squared and negative 21, okay, 6 and 21, 3 goes into both of those, 3 goes into both of those, so I'll factor out 3, and then there's x in both, factor that out. For 7 and negative 2, nothing really goes into both of those, so I'm going to put 1. 6x squared and 2x, 2x, and then negative 21x and 7, 7. Okay. Now, when we have a negative sign, it does make us think, wait a second, does this multiply to give us what we want to get? Okay. As we go through, when we multiply, we should have the product in the box. The number in the box should be the product of the two numbers that meets. That's how we can check our answer. Here you'll notice that we have 7 times 3 equals negative 21. Okay? And that's not true. So we need to say, okay, how can I make this equal negative 21? The one rule is, our leading coefficient, we do not want that to be negative. So I will not change 3x, I will not change 2x. Okay, so 3 times 7 needs to give us negative 21. I'm going to change this to negative 7. Okay, now that fixes this box, but now it messes up this box. 1 times negative 7 is not 7. I need to change this. How can I make 1 times negative 7, 7? Well, I can make that true by changing this to negative 1. So I've got negative 1 times negative 7. Negative 1 times negative 7. And so now I have my two factors. 3x minus 1, 2x minus 7. Alright? Number 4. We got 2x cubed minus 12x squared minus 32. Try this problem out. Bring it back completed. Okay, try this problem out. Bring it back completed. I'll give you a hint that there is a GCF here. I'll give you a hint and say that there's a GCF here, so make sure you don't forget that step. Number 5, 6x squared plus 19x plus 10. So I look through, I have 6x squared, 19, 10, I think 19 is prime, so I can't find a factor, there's not shared variables, okay. So can't do anything with that, I've got to do my Xbox method. Xbox method here, I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to give me 60, and add to give me 19. No, 15 and 4, look at that, 15 and 4. Multiplication rules help out. Okay, 15 times 4 gives me 60. 15 plus 4 gives me 19. And so now I am able to make my box. In my first box, it's going to be 6x squared. Last is 10. Middle, I have 15x and 4x. And so now I'll go through each row and each column and I'll take out the GCF. So GCF here, 2x. GCF here, 5. GCF here, 2. GCF here, 3x. Okay. I can go through and make sure they all multiply to give me what's in the box. 2 times, yep. Alright, that works out. And so now I have 3x plus 2 and 2x plus 5. Okay? Alright, before we go through this last problem, okay, I want to make sure I have this written out for you. So, before we go through this last problem, ax squared plus bx plus c. I kind of want to break down these quadratics for you. Okay? So, things that we should know. Our b value, that's going to be our sum. Okay, it's always going to be the sum. I'll underline this and say a times c is our product number. Okay, that's where we can find the two things that fill in our x's. Okay. This sign will help us with the signs of our two factors. If it's positive, because this is in front of our product number, we have to think, how do numbers become positive? Well, if it's positive, that means that they're the same sign. The reason is that negative times negative is positive, and positive times positive is positive. If it's negative, that means that they have different signs. Okay? When it's negative, well, either way, we want to look at this sign in front of our sum number. Our sum number tells us the sign of the larger number. Okay, because if we're adding two numbers with different signs, if the sum is positive, that means the bigger number has to be positive. If the sum is negative, it tells us that the bigger number has to be negative. Okay, and what knowing this does, and I just want to write this out, although we've been using it, what knowing this does is allows us to make a table like this: 1, 42, 2, 21, 3, 14, 6, 7, and we don't have to go through then and do 7 times 6 and 14 times 3 and 2 times 21 and negative and 42. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Okay, there we go. And 42 times 1. And so we don't have to go through and say, okay, well, we're going to make this whole column negative, and now we have to make 10 sums instead of cutting it down and having to make just, oh, well, it would have been 5 if I added that right. Okay, so knowing this helps you as a kind of is a shortcut for you. If you don't, then as you're making your numbers and you're thinking through, and then you just have more to juggle. Okay, so with that written out, let's do this problem. Let's do it in a different color so we don't get confused. Okay, so we need to find two numbers that, well, first of all, before we start, 18x squared minus 12x minus 6. As I go through this, and I'll just write this down somewhere else, I notice that I have a GCF. And that GCF is 6. So I have 6, factor that out, gives me 3x squared minus 2x minus 1. Now, isn't that something? I took out a GCF and a still isn't 1. So now I took out a GCF and a still isn't 1, so I still have to do my box method. I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me negative 3 and at the same time add to give me negative 2. This sign is negative, so I know that we have different signs. And this sign is negative, so the bigger number is going to be negative. So, what I can see is I got negative 3 and positive 1. Not very many options I can use there to multiply to get negative 3. And so now in my box, I'm going to write my first term, 3x squared, in the first box. My last term, negative 1 in the last box. And then the two terms I just came up with in the other two boxes. Go through and find my GCF. Okay, there's two negatives in a row, so I know I'm going to take out a negative. I don't have to wait till the end there. Okay, I go through and say, does this work for all my boxes? It does, it does. Okay, great. And so I have my two factors, x minus 1 and 3x plus 1. And do not forget your GCF. If you took out a GCF, forgot how to spell it, but if you took out a GCF, it needs to be a part of your final answer. Okay, make sure that you did that for number 4. Alright, so there we go. Factoring when a is not 1 took a little bit more time, and there's no really avoiding that, but here's a process so that you can factor it correctly each and every time. Alright, see ya.